Good. How's everybody doing today? How's everybody doing today? Just wanted to get this out on Twitter too. Give me just a second. All right, good. Trying a few things out with doing some social media alerts, and we are streaming through Restream on Twitch, YouTube, and excuse me, Periscope. So I'm hoping that I'm not really looking to make this a money-making thing by any means. I really just want to reach as many people as possible and get people in the chat and be able to have a conversation. A little bit what I was talking about yesterday was the good thing about meetings is being able to just put out ideas, things that are bouncing around in your head. And sometimes when we do that with friends, or we do that with family, coworkers, or people we're in class with, or wherever we're at, we often find ourselves in echo chambers because of the people that we hang out with, that we work with sometimes, that we go to school with, often hold the same values as we do, at least the people that we tend to hang out with or socialize with, follow on social media. They tend to be of the same mind and kind of hold the same ideals as we have. And these echo chambers are kind of dangerous. I mean, we're in a society where we follow certain news sites, or we follow certain celebrities, or we follow certain ways of following ideologies that we agree with, that hold our values. The only problem with that is when we get into the habit of only searching out places where we have our own ideas parroted back to us. You know, when you go to a meeting and even if you're with other people, sorry, I lost my train of thought, but when you're in meetings, even if you don't have people, even if you're not taking feedback, you are able to say things and hear them. I mentioned yesterday about when you write a paper or you write something, it's suggested that we read it out loud, not just read it silently, scanning the words, because we have the ability to autocorrect. Our brain it already has the spell check in it sometimes. So especially if we've written it, we're biased immediately to our own ideas, especially put on paper, being correct. And when we are able to hear them out loud, we can hear if they're, hear the faults in them. Hear where gosh, that sounds selfish. Where did that come from me? How could I go about thinking about that and not pick up on the fact that I'm being selfish? And part of this just happened to me recently. I'm planning something, and I didn't necessarily want to participate in a particular ritual. And granted, it was my event, but I realized that I have family and friends and people who care about me, who've supported me through a lot of these things. And I didn't want to participate in a particular ritual. And after talking about it and being like, nah, I don't want to do this, and thinking that everybody else was being selfish, it was actually me that was being selfish. And it took, I don't remember exactly what it was. I think anyway, what is important is that we realize when we put our ideas out, when we're able to hear our ideas, and not just in an echo chamber of people who agree with us and who parrot back our own ideas back to us, that we realize that I was being selfish. And I think that's a healthy road to be on. And part of going to meetings is, having the sponsor and having genuine, real friends. Because if we just have fake friends, they're never going to tell us when they're wrong, because they just want to be in our good light. But if we have friends that genuinely care about us, they'll tell us you're being crazy, and I think what you're talking about doesn't make any sense. Or that, in my case, the people I was telling it to agreed with me and they were just parroting my own ideas back. No fault of theirs. So I think that if we create and find and lock ourselves into echo chambers, that is a very dangerous place to be. And when you're drinking and using drugs, you're often in those echo chambers because the people that you're associating with are of the mind that drugs are good, and using and continuing to use that's the only focus. And as long as they want to stay loaded and you're hanging out with them and you want to be loaded, and it's very easy to convince each other either to continue to be loaded or to go get loaded. So finding people who are outside of that mind, finding people who are outside that echo chamber is a really good idea. I've been to lots of meetings. I've never gotten loaded in a meeting. I went to meetings loaded. There was a time, there were several times where I was trying to get get things straight. This whole thing, whether you're in meetings or you're not, it's about progress, not perfection, and continuing to do better, and stumbling and falling, but and mainly is admitting when you effed up. And that's hard, especially if you're going to meetings loaded, because when you say somebody, I've been getting loaded, and I actually came to a meeting the other day and was loaded, people are going to be looking out for that. And that's one way of breaking out of an echo chamber. But the echo chamber I was kind of getting at yesterday was the one that we have in our own heads with our own ideas. And even if you don't talk to somebody and get feedback, the act of saying some things out loud, thinking about it later, you can come to the realization that maybe you're not on the right track. And there's another interesting side of that too, because there are times when we have information and sharing it or not, and there's power in information. And if you're the type of person who wants to have information, not share it with other people, because then it gives you an edge up on other people, I think that's a strange way to be. And I think especially with this, of the mind of trying to, stop using, and the recovery community, and going to meetings, that's all about sharing information freely and without holding any power over anyone else. I remember when I first started going, and the sponsor that I had, been sober 24 or 5 years, probably 26 years now. I haven't talked to him for a while. This was when I was living on Oahu. And I had asked him, I'm a couple of weeks sober, and I'm like, man, 24 years. How do you do that? And he's like, well, it takes 24 years. And, the cool thing about the recovery community is it's a place where information is not withheld. There's not any secret. There are cliques, and there are, as with anything that you go to, there's cliques, and there's people who kind of hang out together, and they kind of only associate. A lot of people, sometimes it's people who've been sober a long time, and there's a group of them, and they don't necessarily want to, the newcomers are going, yeah, newbies, and whatnot, which I never really understood that. Why there was such a separation, or especially of people who have been going to these things for a long time, and their reluctance to talk to newer people, or to be free with them, and to be welcoming to them. And, because they say it here in the beginning, oh, the new people are the most important people in the room, welcome for coming, and then they don't talk to them or pull them aside. And of the many things that frustrated me about meetings, that was probably one of the biggest ones. I have talked about this before. I'm not an avid meeting goer now. In the first year or 2 years, it was very important, because I didn't know anything else. I didn't have any other people that I was hanging out with. I was one of those types that I isolated when I was using. Because, as a heroin addict, there's nothing more frightening than sharing, in my opinion. And when I was drinking, because it was either or. I was either drinking or I was using opiates and heroin. And I've talked about that before too. Opiates and heroin to me are the same thing, just a different method. So as a person who isolates when they use, going to these meetings and finding more people isolating, not in the same way exactly, but socially isolating themselves in the meeting, found that very strange. And what I like about the idea of a live stream is that everybody is just as welcome, and you are encouraged to use the chat box. I've got a nice window here, and you won't be ignored. There are a lot of part of the structural power of any organization is holding knowledge, and to some degree that gives the people who hold the knowledge some power over others. And the great thing, even though there is this tendency sometimes to isolate within meetings, the knowledge of how to get sober, there's no secret. There's no secret to it. it's been laid out. It's worked for a long, long time. And it wasn't until I actually followed through with many of the things that are suggestions. It's all suggestions. You don't have to do anything. Just like it's suggested that you, use a Kleenex when you blow your nose, or that you put on a parachute before you jump out of an airplane. There's a million of those, analogies. Some of them are a little bit more disgusting than others, but I guess it's a suggestion that you put on a parachute before you jump out of an airplane is the most appropriate one. Because it is, for me, it was life and death. And in the various programs, which there's one, there's a caveat for every substance or every type of habit that is, considered an addictive habit. It has its own meaning now, depending on where you're at, the availability. But there's usually one in particular that is there, and it can be for everything. The frustrating part about when you only have one or maybe two available is that oftentimes you get people who are like, you go to one that focuses on one particular issue or substance, and they don't want you talking about the other ones. And this was very, I've butted heads in a couple of meetings. Some of them will even open up with that type of thing. Hey, we're talking about this thing. Please don't bring up your other problems. And usually made a point to bring it up and say, there of the traditions that are in some of these programs, there's one, and it's not even a requirement that you show up sober, or that you show up not loaded, or that you don't go home and get loaded. It's only that you have a desire and inclination to stop. It doesn't say you have to stop, it just says that you have the inclination, you have the desire to stop whatever behavior it is that's causing you the most problems. And I like to bring that up when people suggest that you shouldn't bring up another problem, because I have a desire to stop that one too, and this one. But really in meetings, with the subject or the topic of whichever substance or behavior that you're trying to stop comes up, it's not what should be discussed in the meetings, in my opinion. What I found most is you're not discussing sitting around, smoking weed or drinking beer, or shooting heroin. You're not necessarily sitting around and discussing that. The issues actually revolve around the consequences. What happened? What's going on in your life because of this? What have you put aside to do this? What is, the consequences? Consequences aren't always bad either. There are good consequences and bad consequences. As I study psychology and we're learning about behavior modification, consequences are both good and bad. For the most part, the consequences that I had while I was drinking and using were not good. And those were the types of consequences that I was discussing in meetings, not the use of any particular substance or doing something. So, but the giving of information in a meeting is not something that is hidden or secret. There was one that I used to go to that was at a VA hospital, and there was an old, grizzly, big, loud, been sober a long time, dirty overall wearing, truck driving, and he would go on and 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 say, just don't drink. And then on and on and on and on and on again and again and again, and just don't drink. And it was frustrating at first, but there's a lot of truth in that. That's that. As I was talking about it the other day, excellence is not an act. We are what we repeatedly do. Excellence is not an act; it's a habit. But there is one act when we're sobering up that we do, and that is stop. But that one act is not usually when we just stop and that's it. We think that that's the end of the problem. It keeps going. So the act of stopping has to be sort of a repeated process. That means when it comes up again, you choose A or you choose B. A being use or B anything else just about. And until we're able to choose B versus use, but it also that is getting out of that echo chamber. The using after a time of sobriety, the using again is usually not an immediate process. Sometimes it is, and I've been in those situations too, where sometimes just a spur of the moment, you get up, you get out of your chair or wherever you're at, and you go in and you use. It's happened to me before, but it's usually not the case. It's usually after some time of thinking about it, that echo chamber, your own echo chamber, bouncing that idea, sorting it out. I'm going to score. I'm going to watch Terminator 2 on Blu-ray. And I'm going to play Call of Duty just one more night. Just one more night. And then I'll quit again forever. And I'm never going to tell anybody. I don't know how many times I've done that. And, insert whichever movie or video game that you want or activity. But it usually for me, and then I created another echo chamber because I decided I was not going to tell anybody. So then whether I had done it or not, the echo chamber leading up was that I was bouncing around in my head to use or not to use, and didn't bring it up to anybody. Didn't say anything in the meeting, didn't say anything to a sponsor that I had, didn't tell any good friends that were actually not interested in using. If you tell somebody and they're like, I'm holding the bag, let's go right now, then that's probably not the right time to get out of your echo chamber. Maybe keeping it in there for a little bit longer until you get to a different place where you can release it might be a better idea. But it also depends on if it's the echo chamber in your head. If you put it into another echo chamber that is likely to agree with you, then that's probably not the best solution to the problem either. But so the first echo chamber was that I had it in my head that I was going to use, and I didn't tell anybody. I didn't tell anybody that was devising this master plan for one last time. And so then let's say I followed through with it. Then I created another echo chamber because I said I'm not going to, and I'm never going to tell anybody. So when you get to the point when you've done the bad thing, that you intend to only be the one thing, and there's that cliche that we're only as sick as our secrets. And as much as I dislike talking in cliches, and I hope to not do a bunch of that here, it's fucking true though. We are as sick as our secrets. And when we have that secret, when we've used that one time, that was supposed to be that one time, and we don't tell anybody, and in meetings, it's humiliating. It should be humiliating for a minute. I don't think it should be so humiliating that you're not willing to do it though. And, but starting over is important. No matter how long, big or little time of sobriety that you have managed to tuck away, that you have managed to invest and save, and it's valuable to me. I like those terms, invest and saving in sobriety. So no matter how much time you invest and save, and you blew it, you blew your savings, you blew your sobriety savings on this one night. But for me, it never stayed at one night or one time when I kept it a secret. Inevitably, always turned into full-blown on. And it's because I created that other echo chamber, because I didn't go to a sponsor or to a friend or admit in a meeting, hey, I'm starting over. And that's the whole thing of progress, not perfection. I was reading a book, and the people who started one of the biggest programs that's used in treatment centers a lot, they didn't want their program to be used for mass treatment. Because the idea in mass treatment, a lot of these treatment programs that you go to, their thing is abstinence. And for me, abstinence works. Abstinence is where I want to be. Harm reduction is the idea of reducing the harm, reducing the consequences of using. And if a person is able to do that, God bless them, because I wasn't. But for the most part, when you go to a treatment program, it's on or off. If you use, you can be kicked out, asked to leave, start over, whatever it is. There's usually some kind of, no tolerance policy for not using. And when they started one of the biggest ones, they didn't want treatment programs to model or to use their model, because the idea behind the meetings was progress, not perfection. And the only serious consequences that there are for using and then going into a meeting and saying, hey, I used, is the embarrassment, the humility that comes with it. And hopefully, your peers will give you a little bit of a hard time, and not in your non-peers, the people who are there longer, will give you a little bit of a hard time, but at the same time in a loving way and in an accepting way. Because most of them who are there didn't get there overnight. Some of them, many of them do. They make a decision, and it's that night that they decide that they're not going to use anymore, and after that, they don't. It wasn't my case. So there is a little bit of, the humility that is necessary to going into a meeting after however much time you have and starting over. I mean, if you're going every other day and you're like, hey, I'm new again, there's probably not that much humility involved in that. But for a person who a month or two or a couple of weeks or years, and going back in and saying, hey, there's some humility that goes, humiliation. And, but, being humble is a virtue. And a lot of times when we maybe that's what we needed, especially after a long period of sobriety, maybe we needed to feel that humiliation again. They talk about the pitiful and incomprehensible demoralization that goes along with drinking and using. And man, oh man, I think that there are people who will agree that that is definitely true. But the humiliation of going into one of these meetings or self-help groups and saying that, I stumbled, and stopping it right there and getting back on track, that consequence is far less than the consequences that could follow, like losing the job, family out on, losing a place to live, losing a car, getting a DUI, getting arrested for possession, or whatever the case may be, whatever the consequence may be. The consequence of going and just saying, hey, I messed up can be, it's a blow to your pride. And it is a lesser consequence, but sometimes there are people who would rather go to jail than go into a meeting and be honest. And that's a bad place to be too. When we're not, the program, for me, all of any success or anything that I was able to do while I was using was due to lying and manipulation. For the most part, when I was using, all my success was based on lies and manipulation. And I didn't really even know how to go about life telling the truth. So when I sobered up, of the countless times I sobered up, it wasn't until the last couple of times where I actually had to start practicing honesty and not lying at all, ever, and trying to, but when it becomes habit, when it's one of those things that's habitual, lie about what you had for lunch when there's no reason to lie about what you had for lunch. With people who care about you, all they really wanted to know is what you had for lunch. They don't care if you had a steak or if you had a salad. They're just asking you what you had for lunch. But for whatever reason, I was the type of person, and I don't know if it was my trying to fit in or trying to seem cool, which is half of my probably did everything out of fear. So it's more than likely the reason why I was lying is because I was scared for whatever retarded reason to come up with to not just say that I had PB&J instead of tacos. And practicing telling the truth became one of those things that I did until it became natural. And now I'm still fallible and tell the occasional lie. I won't call it a fib. I won't call it anything else. It's a lie. And I usually feel terrible about it later. And when it's kind of in these steps, they talk about, you need to make amends and you need to make restitution for certain things, but there is a caveat in there that making amends and restitution when it's going to cause more trouble, not necessarily for you, but if it's going to send you to jail, depending on the thing, depending on what it is, and this is something that a person should sort out with their sponsor, not sort out on their own. But really when it's going to do damage to another person is when it's not always right to make that amends or to try and make restitution. Because again, as I was talking about in the beginning, are we being selfish? Is it because I need to clear my plate, that I need to drag this person, I need to devastate this person and tell them what happened? For me to feel good, I need to break this other person's heart, or I need to shake up their whole thing so that I can feel better. I don't know that would end up making me feel a whole lot worse, I would hope, than making that amend that is something that can just be between you, your sponsor, and God, as you understand it. So as I strive for this honesty, there are times where I've gone back and said, I said this, but that never happened. And usually they're like, huh? I don't even remember. So fortunately, in my quest to become truthful and just not lie under any circumstances, but when I do, make it right, except if it's just if it'll cause havoc. Fortunately, we should get to the point where if we have told, if you're telling a fib, that there isn't going to be some sort of strange consequence attached to it. And if there is, again, this is a time for sponsor and out of the echo chamber, not something to necessarily sort out yourself. And that's, another great thing about meetings is that it gets you out of the echo chamber that's in your own head, or the echo chamber of surrounding yourself with people who drink and use with you. There are a couple of, I was watching an interesting presentation today about ignorance, willful ignorance, and nescience. They're all sort of, the root words are all sort of the same. The nescience is when it's just so far, you're not educated on a particular thing. You have no idea. Often that's a person who is new to a program or new to a study, or let's say a person in living in a remote island and they've never seen a car, so they're nescient about modern civilization things because they've just never experienced it. And the ignorance it's about the same thing. They kind of know about it. They're aware but not educated on it. And then there's willful ignorance, where you avoid any sort of education on it. You avoid the subject altogether. You're not nescient of it because you're aware of it, and you're not necessarily ignorant of it anymore because you're just kind of, baseball, wow. And then there's willful ignorance, where you're like, I've seen that baseball thing and I don't want to know anything about it. And I think that it's unfortunate to be in a willfully ignorant state. I totally understand a person who is nescient of a topic or an idea, and it's just they're not even aware. And then the ignorance is the aware person, but and then there's the willful ignorance, which is like, I don't even want to hear anything about it or against it. I have my echo chamber, I have my bias on it, and I'm perfectly comfortable with it, and I'm going to stay right here. And in what's going on around us, whatever, I'm not political. Well, I'm not a lefty or a righty. I'm not a conservative or a progressive. I'm not a Democrat or a Republican. But I know a lot about both of them, and it makes me frustrated even more. And it's interesting. It doesn't frustrate me, but it's interesting to see people, or to get into conversations about topics. And not that I'm necessarily trying to convince a person one way or the other, but a topic comes up, let's discuss. I heard this about this. But when it goes against the bias that they already have, as we were talking about, the echo chamber that they're in, having their own ideas parroted back to them, they become willfully ignorant to learning more about a subject that they have this firmly held belief on. And I'm of the idea, if you don't know what you're fighting against, how do you know what you're really fighting for? And that, tying all of this back into sobriety and meeting going, new people, it's like, and I was this person too. I thought that I was never going to have a good time. I thought I was never going to be able to watch movies or play video games or hang out with anybody. I thought my life was going to be miserable and drab. But any alcoholic's and heroin addict's life is usually pretty drab. There's only one focus going on. The rest of the time is itching and sweating and vomiting. And so anyway, but I thought that nothing was ever going to be good. Nothing, I never thought life could be awesome again without it. I thought, okay, I'll sober up. That's fine. I won't have all these other consequences. But then again, life is going to be because I'm not going to enjoy any of it. And that was an echo chamber that I found myself in. And once I got through the detox process, and once I got through there's like 6 weeks where your body's just trying to adjust, and you can't really feel anything. You still feel pain, guilt, and shame. You still feel plenty of that, but the pleasure stuff is not really. I haven't been able to, get your endorphin and dopamine and that whole thing going on again. And that hasn't sorted itself out. So the idea of having a good time it's a couple of weeks away, and an insurmountable feat when you're considering getting sober and you've tried before. But the echo chamber that I was never going to have fun again if I stayed willfully ignorant of that. And it's what a lot of people, you start going to meetings or you go into treatment, as I did many times, and they're like, hey, just give it a year. Give sobriety a year. Why not? What do you got to lose? You have a lot of stuff to face. You'll have a lot of honesty that will need to be had, and you may lose, and then there's a possibility of gaining some new friends. But just give it a year and try it. And that takes us out of the echo chamber that we have in our head that this is the only, I'm just meant for one way. Or the willful ignorance of sobriety for me isn't possible. I was that guy. There's a thing that they read in some of the meetings where they talk about people who are incapable of being honest with themselves and constitutionally incapable of being honest. I guess that's what it was. And they just weren't going to be sober. They have such a defect that they just weren't going to achieve sobriety. And there are such unfortunates. And I decided to use that as my victimhood. I'm constitutionally incapable of being honest with myself, and I'm one of those unfortunate people who's just never going to be sober. Well, it turns out that's baloney. I wanted that to be my victimhood at the time. There's enough victims already. There are people who, like myself, as a young person, were victimized. And then as we grow older, we have the choice to either, some people continue into victimhood and, cycling bad relationships, but also then some of us who've been victimized turn into victimizers and use the excuse of being a victim in the past as our justification for victimizing our family, our friends, our loved one, our boss, our neighbors, society, with our baloney. And I wanted to use the victimhood of constitutionally incapable of being honest with myself. And I am just such an unfortunate who just will never be sober. It's just my lot. And it was baloney. So far today, that's not true. So, and that was being willfully ignorant. I was being willfully ignorant of being honest. And I was also too much of a coward at several times when I had stayed in my own echo chamber and sorted out the perfect plan for just one more night. And it wasn't one more night. And instead of telling people, and instead of going into a meeting the next day, or not even going into a meeting, but just telling somebody, hey, I screwed up last night. I kept that secret. The secret builds up. We're as sick as our secrets, as the cliche goes, and I was, and I stayed in it. So there is, our echo chambers are very, very dangerous, not just for ideologies, but for ourselves. And when we create our own echo chamber of our own bad thoughts and destructive behavior, and destructive thoughts for ourselves. My heater's kicking on. I don't know if you can hear that. It just kicks on for a second so it doesn't freeze. It's like super cold here in the Northwest. That picture, I took that. It's not really near my house. It's about 2 hours away. It's by my aunt's house. But that's what it looks like around here right now. But when that our own self echo chamber can be our own trap in evading humility or humiliation, and getting out of the trap that we put ourselves in, and there is a lot in sobriety that is super uncomfortable. And that giving it a year suggestion is the best. It's the best advice I ever took. It's the best suggestion I ever followed. It's been almost 4 years now. July will be 4 years. And it's not the first time I've gotten sober or the first time I've been sober years at a time, but it's the first time that I actually did work steps all the way through and made those amends and did it over the course of a long period of time. I didn't just sit down and do it in an afternoon or do a fourth and fifth step one time. It was kind of a process that I did over a long period of time. And I'm not a person who's in meetings all the time now. I still appreciate them and go very occasionally. But at the same time, my echo chamber is, I've gone from a person who isolated when they shot heroin and drank alcohol to, I think there's a big difference between isolation and solitude. I'm an introverted person who isolated while drinking and using, but now as a sober person, because I can handle it and I appreciate I like myself. I enjoy myself. I don't have a bunch of whacked out stuff going on and pulling me in other directions. That having solitude is comfortable. I'm comfortable there now. And I'm not, I don't avoid groups and I'm not a shut-in, but I prefer solitude. And there is a big difference between solitude and isolation, in my opinion. Isolation was super unhealthy for me. Solitude is something that I appreciate. And so that's, anyway, long story as to, I don't go to a ton of meetings anymore, but will suggest it with everything I've got because it does work and it worked for me. And there are so many people, there are people who are not like me. They may go from isolating when they're using, or they have a group of friends and they just, they use too. And then getting out of that, going to meetings offers you a whole new social circle. And granted, there are a lot of people in there who I don't care to associate with, but there are a few that are really, really good people. And being able to find, and you might even find, just new friends. They don't have to stay meeting friends, and you don't have to only socialize in these meetings, but just meeting other people who are outside of your echo chamber, who are outside of your, you're nescient of them because you just don't know. It's unexplored territory, and learning about it is a great thing. And so you can either, an extrovert who sobers up and finds these meetings may find a whole new area with which to express their extrovertism, and that's a good thing too, so that's about all I've got for right now. We may do something a little bit later. I have a couple of subscribers. I sincerely appreciate you. I sincerely appreciate anybody who took the time to watch this, and I hope that you have a great day, and thank you.